Hey everyone, it's John Heath here again for Milton Rose Learning with another Let's Learn lesson on how to ace Othello. So basically it's a writing session, so we're going to look at how to break down essay questions for Othello, looking at keywords and key phrases in the title. Then we're going to look at how your kind of tutor or teacher kind of marks your work for Othello, which is very important that you understand your assessment objectives. And then we'll round off by looking at a nice model answer, and we'll just kind of see how a really good paragraph tackles those assessment objectives and meets them and basically hits them to get marks. Okay, so let's dive in without further ado. So the first one is we must unpack kind of essay questions. A lot of students don't. They get impetuous and they kind of dive in because they have no patience these days. So what you want to do is you want to have patience and you want to spend a few minutes breaking down an essay question conceptually. Okay, breaking down all the key parts of the question. So let's have some practice together then. So first off, we've got a bit of an essay question here that says, in Othello, trust is both a strength and a fatal weakness. To what extent do you agree? Okay, quite deep, quite philosophical almost. There's a lot there that we need to break apart. So let's do it then. So you go after basically each keyword or phrase, what we call trigger words in the question. Now the first one for me is trust. So it's a thematic question. It's focusing on the theme of trust, if we can call it that. So in terms of methods, Shakespeare uses stage directions. There's a lot of dramatic irony around this theme and complex characterization to explore that tragic theme of trust and how it's basically violated throughout the play. So by doing that, I've got an initial sense of the thematic heart of this essay. Then I'm going to focus on strength and weakness, or fatal weakness, I think it was. So what does that mean? Well, it's kind of asking me to give a balanced assessment here, isn't it? So I must consider both sides of that argument. How is trust a strength? And then also, how is it a tragic weakness causing hamartia of Othello, his tragic downfall in some ways? So in Othello, trust appears to be a sign of strength, but ultimately it triggers the nemesis, the tragic the kind of tragic downfall of the character and of many characters in the play. So it's a double-edged sword, as we would say. Okay, it has two kind of elements, and we want to consider both sides for a really well-balanced essay here. Then it says, doesn't it, to what extent do you agree? And hence why we've put the weighing scales there. I am a Libra, so that's my star sign right there. So to what extent do we agree? Well, this phrase calls for you to evaluate, doesn't it? We have to evaluate and weigh both sides of that statement and be sure to look at things from both perspectives. So it means that your connectives are going to be very important in this essay. So however, on the other hand, those kind of classic phrases which then help you to balance out both views, basically. Okay, so we're going to need to evaluate and look at things from multiple perspectives. Very, very important. Okay, so just to say then, that is how you unpack an essay question for Othello. Always do that, because you will be building a nice solid platform then to build on when you write, and you'll be coming at it from a much better perspective. Now the second thing is, well, that's great, John, but then how does the examiner or my teacher mark my Othello assignment? Well, they never mark blind, I can promise you that. 20 years in the classroom has kind of backed up that statement. They'll never mark blind. They have assessment objectives. They have targets that your Othello essay basically needs to hit. Now, it depends on your exam board what the wording of the assessment objectives, but if I'm honest, they're all kind of much of a muchness. They're all kind of quite similar in many ways. And these are the general kind of things that you need to hit in an Othello assignment. The first one is always academic expression, because this is English. So you've got to talk the talk, effectively. You've got to write clearly, write formally, no slang, write nice and posh and formal, and use the subject terminology that we've kind of hammered into your heads. So similes, metaphor, imagery, symbolism, motifs, all of that linguistic and structural kind of language. We're expecting you to be using that, okay? As well as the basics for academic expression. So spelling, punctuation, grammar needs to be good, paragraphing. I know it's basics, but we expect that, and that all comes under academic expression. Number 2 is what we would call detailed analysis. Okay, so you must zoom in on key quotations, look at individual words, interrogate individual phrases. Don't just lump a quote in and go, this shows this. Okay, that's vague. You're never going to get a good mark doing that. So we need to zoom in and have that precision in your writing. Very, very important. Okay. Also, explore the writer's methods. So Shakespeare's methods, the language choices, and then the structural kind of choices and their impact on the audience. Okay. And what you can do when you're talking about the audience, you can talk about a modern audience like me and you and how we would react, but also you can look at the Elizabethan / Jacobean audience as well. You can talk about how they would react as well, because that's 400 or 500 years ago and they saw the world very, very differently. Okay. Then we have looking at what I would call the big ideas and themes. So I always say this, the weaker students just tell you what's happening in the plot. The better students, though, look at the plot and then look beyond that into the bigger issues, the big themes and the authorial intentions behind what's going on in the scene. So, for instance, you want to kind of look at issues of, for instance, with Othello, issues of race, for instance. It's a play which explores those very deep issues of race and racial kind of tensions almost in this period, which go beyond just, the speeches of Othello, for instance. So you want to kind of look at the big ideas, go deep, as I say in my classes, go deep. And then the last one is context. So context is the history and all the social stuff that was happening at that time. And there was a lot going on, obviously. There's a lot of historical changes. But when you put some context in, be sure to link it to the play. If you don't link context to the play, you won't get the marks. Okay, I can't say it any clearer than that. So really do link them up. And you can see a little example, which I popped on the board. During the Elizabethan era, there was an inherent racism towards African characters like Othello. It's a bit of context, isn't it? Nevertheless, Shakespeare subverts such negative stereotypes in portraying him as a largely noble character. So I put the context in about the racial element of the text and then linked it to how Othello is portrayed, and Shakespeare is subverting that portrayal. Okay, so effectively I've done context and then I've linked it to the play. Always a good thing to do. Okay, so those are very broadly, those are the objectives that you would need to hit in an Othello assignment. So let's look at an example kind of paragraph. So I'm just going to read it if you don't mind, and then we'll look at each assessment objective and how it was hit in the paragraph. So let's have a look. However, as the tragedy unfolds, Shakespeare shows how this strength becomes Othello's fatal weakness. The word fatal implies that this flaw is not just harmful but ultimately deadly. Othello's blind trust in Iago, whom he calls honest Iago, worst words ever, repeatedly is based on social assumptions. Iago is a white Venetian soldier, whereas Othello is an outsider. In the racial and hierarchical context of Jacobean England, Shakespeare's audience may have been primed to understand why Othello would feel vulnerable in his position, and therefore over-rely on those he sees as allies within the dominant culture. Othello's inability to see Iago's manipulation until it's too late reveals the destructive power of misplaced trust. Okay, beautiful paragraph, really nice. You know, if I was marking that in any of my classes or with any of my tutees, I'd say, yeah, that's pretty good. So first off then, let's just look, and we've put them on the sides here. So let's just look at what it's doing well. So first one, academic expression. It's got a very formal academic style, very polished. This student can clearly write. You know, for instance, this flaw is not just harmful, but ultimately deadly. Yeah, it's nicely expressed. It's also got a clear argument that it's pushing forward very clearly. It's not just describing the play. And it has subject-specific terms. So kind of fatal weakness, outsider, manipulation. They're not literary terminology necessarily, but they're advanced vocabulary, and that is enough sometimes to hit the academic expression, as well as the terminology that's needed. Okay, number 2 down here, analysis of language. So there's a close focus on kind of repetition of Iago and honest Iago. It does unpack the connotations of lexical choices such as fatal, which has connotations of being deadly and unavoidable. And it connects it then to characterization of Iago and Othello. So it's kind of analysing the language and then linking to what's happening in the play, which is the essence of a good essay. Then moving over, how does it get into the big ideas and themes? Well, it develops the theme of trust as destructive when it's misplaced. That's the big idea that it's exploring, which is very nice. It links Othello's vulnerability to broader issues of race, loyalty, and ultimately power. He feels disempowered in a racist culture that doesn't provide for him and just discriminates against him. And it strengthens the line of argument that trust is both noble and dangerous. So it's getting into the big ideas and themes which revolve around the question, which is, again, the essence of a good answer. Then lastly, we have context. So it ties Othello's trust to Jacobean anxieties about race, status and identity. It does it a little bit implied, but it doesn't always have to be explicit. I think it's still doing it. Recognise his audience response. They might understand Othello's reliance on Venetian insiders. So I think that's, again, kind of touching just briefly on that context. And frame Shakespeare's tragedy as a reflection on social prejudice as well as personal flaws. By focusing on that, it's not the history necessarily, but it's Shakespeare's views, which you can argue, you know, would tick off context in some way. So what I would say, I've been a bit of a whistle-stop tour there, but hopefully you've found that useful. So just to kind of reiterate then, what you need to do is you need to break down your Othello question. Don't dive in. It's very important. Then think about how your teacher is going to mark your work. Don't just write blindly. Think about the assessment objectives, and your teacher will always give you the mark scheme if you ask very nicely. So you're not going to write blind, and then return to that model P paragraph which we wrote for you, just to see how to hit and to remind you how to hit the assessment objectives in your next Othello assignment. Okay, so hopefully you've had some fun. Hopefully that's been a bit of help for you. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon. Share it with all your friends as well, so you never miss another Let's Learn video again. Obviously, if you have any questions or queries, or if you want to just kind of just chat to us, then please do drop comments in and we'll always do our best to reply. It just remains to say then, obviously, thanks for listening and take care.